compare their education with ours.
Oh yes, I can. Absolutely.
We'll save it till the end, guys. It's going to get answers and come up with a lot more questions at the
There is
end.
a Q&A portion at the end. So I just want to say thank everyone for coming. This is Turning Point USA's first event at CSUN, so it means a lot that you all came out. We're really excited to have the exchange and critique of ideas, so let's give a big round of applause for our speakers making that happen tonight. On the capitalist side, we have a former speechwriter for George H.W. Bush and CEO of the Atlas Society, Ms. Jennifer Grossman. On the socialist side, we have CSU
Communist.
CSU Channel Islands professor and former Green Party candidate, Dr. Michael Powelson. And our moderator this evening is from CommonGroundTalks.com, Emiliano Acosta.
All right, let's get to the fun. Thank you guys both for being here, and thanks to the audience for being here as well. First event, very happy about this. Let's jump right into the fun, yeah? So we have a lot of millennials here in the room, so we'll talk a little bit about taxes, because that's fun. So what kind of tax plan would be the most successful for us millennials?
Well,
I thought we were going to do a 5-minute.
Yeah, you guys said you had a 5-minute opening remarks.
Yes. So yeah, we'll do a 5-minute open remarks.
Yeah, and then
And then we'll
you
go
guys
to
have
questions.
microphones as well.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make sense? We each make it an opening
Yes,
5. That's
yes,
what I was
that's
told.
what
Yes,
they're
that's fine.
And then we go to the questions.
So rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, one of my favorite quotes as a speechwriter is George Orwell's, which is, "He who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future." Now, we're not talking about control over the means of production, we're not going to be talking about control over the military or control over territory, we're talking about control over narrative, control over your understanding of history. And as students, the people that control your understanding of history, that control your present, are your teachers. And when I was in school, when I was at Columbia, and then I was at Harvard, I forgot most of what I learned. But what I do remember is I remember the narrative. And I remember who I was taught to admire as our heroes and whom I was taught to disdain as our villains. And the heroes were never the entrepreneurs. They were never the business people. They were also rarely at that time considered to be the military or law enforcement, and they certainly were not conservatives or Republicans. I was a Peace Corps baby. My parents were our Kennedy Democrats, and we were raised with the idea of ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. As I grew older, I came to actually reject that as a false choice. But I thought at the time it sounded pretty good. I wanted to do something for my country, I wanted to do something significant, so that seemed like I'm going to go into government. And that's what I did. And I went down to work for President George H.W. Bush, otherwise known as President Copperfield. Poor guy. I don't know, Trump is maybe having more negative influence over some of our mores than others. But anyway, so I really loved being a speechwriter. As some of you know, following me on Twitter, I got really good at writing bad puns and bad jokes and bad punchlines. One which I cannot claim credit for, however, is read my lips, no new taxes. Fortunately, by breaking that pledge, President Bush not only lost us the election, but he lost a lot of credibility, and he reaffirmed the idea that the only way that you can know that a politician is lying is that his lips are moving. But I lost my job. Fortunately, having some experience as a speechwriter, I got another job working on the National Commission on Economic Growth and Tax Reform, and wrote this book on tax reform. As you can see, it's pretty small, it's relatively flat, so there goes the old adage that you can't judge a book by its cover. So anyway, I spent most of my career in the private sector. One of the commissioners on the National Commission on Economic Growth and Tax Reform was Ted Forstman. He was the perhaps most evil of all kinds of businessmen. He was a financier, so I got to have some experience in what conditions are required to form capital, how do you invest capital, who benefits from investing capital, and the companies that benefit, the people that do the investing. After that, I went to work for an even more kind of evil corporation, a global, big corporation, a agribusiness corporation, Dole Food Company. Only if I worked for Monsanto. And then, unfortunately or fortunately, as the nature of reality, markets changed. It became harder and harder for Dole to have a profit. Mr. Murdoch, the owner of the company, sold it to the Japanese, a country which, by the way, has a lower corporate tax rate than the United States. Did I blame the greedy businessmen? Did I blame capitalism? No. I was thankful for the years that I had, and I was thankful for the experience, and perhaps most thankful of all for at long last, coming to realize the painful experience of having to find a work in your late 40s and dig deep and learn new skills and call on friends and try new things and jump into the sharing economy, which is what I ultimately did, made me a better person. And now I'm very privileged to run the Atlas Society and to advance the ideas of a very controversial badass bitch named Ayn Rand, who fled communism and who wrote about fantasy and wrote about the epic adventure of capitalism, but also had firsthand experience with what it was like to have the altruistic impulses of the collective foisted upon her when her family was dispossessed of their home and their business. So anyway, I think I've taken more than my 5 times, so I will see the remainder of
Thank you.
She flees Soviet Russia, but not before she got a college education in a country that did not allow women to even go to college or university when the Tsar was running. When the communists took over, now women can go to the college and the university. And she's done my job for me, because you admit these guys are all a bunch of scumbags, right? You just said that.
No,
backstabbing financiers and all that.
That's the perception of them, but absolutely.
Well, I take you at face value. But I'd like to say that it's great to be back at CSUN, but I have a bitter experience. I used to teach here, and in 2009, those bums on Wall Street tanked out the economy, and for no fault of mine, I lose my job. I mean, this is the painful reality of a market system, is the people that run our economy run it to the ground for one sole purpose, profit maximization, which means they're driving everybody's wages down, their benefits, throwing people in the unemployment rolls. Once they can't do anything else, they tank it out, they get bailed out, and me and millions of others lose their job. That's the reality of a market system that we live in today. But capitalism isn't only about just tanking out the economy periodically. It's an extremely violent and destructive system. It's driven by one consideration, profit. And so if it's profitable to drop bombs on Middle Easterners for no reason at all, that's going to happen. I don't think anybody can seriously argue that Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, do they really represent a threat to our well-being here in the United States? It's extremely profitable to sell war. And that's why we're doing, even though the majority of Americans in this country are not interested in continuing to bomb these countries. It's the same thing with environmental pollution. It is profitable to sell fossil fuels. That's why they're being released into the environment at an unprecedented rate, to the point that it's going to probably end up killing all of us. But the oil companies control every single gallon of petroleum beneath the ground, and they intend to sell every tablespoon of it. And they're not interested in a discussion about going to alternative fuels, because it's a profit-driven system. It is unbelievably cruel the way that this world and this country produces enough food to feed itself. And yet, because it's not profitable to feed the poor of the world, it doesn't happen. I had the good fortune of traveling to India when I was a young man. And, India produces more than enough food to feed itself. And yet, you've got 45% malnourishment. Why? Because the Indian capitalists that control the food in India can make more money selling it in China. This is a really, really cruel, brutal system. We just heard about the whole opioid epidemic. What is that about? You can make a lot of money dumping opioids, the big pharma guys dumping opioids all over this country and getting people, they're drug dealers, they're literally drug dealers. And so I don't expect to convince all of you today, but just take it under consideration. What you've heard about communism is from people that hate it. It's like going to somebody from the Ku Klux Klan and asking them, tell us about African Americans. You're not going to get a fair hearing, right? And you have not ever gotten a fair hearing about communism or what it even means. But it's the 100-year anniversary of the Russian Revolution. 1917. And what happened? In the middle of a butcherous, murderous war of greed and profit, the Russian working class and the peasants had the courage to rise up, go on strike, and then they took over the factories. And you know what they discovered? They can run them themselves. And note to you guys right now, it's the working class that runs this city right now as we speak. They don't need bosses to tell them what to do. And then, once the communists took over, the Bolsheviks, which were leading the workers, they got rid of the Tsar, right? Gone. They went and signed a peace treaty with Germany, and at least for the Russian war, peace in Russia, the murder, the death, the destruction was at an end. This is what working class people do when they're in power. And then they got rid of all the Tsarist laws, and so under the communist leadership supported by the workers, that meant that homosexuality was no longer criminalized in Russia. A country that brutally discriminated against gay people, no more. And you could not be charged in Russia for 20 years until the late 30s when Stalin put it back in. This is what happens when working class people run things. Women were given complete equality, legal equality. In fact, the very first female on any cabinet in any modern nation was Alexandra Kollontai, who became a member of the Politburo in the very first year of communist rule. And all of the horrific discrimination against Jews, the pogroms, the beatings, they had an apartheid system, it was called the Pale. All of that came to an end, and in fact, out of the 7 original Politburo members, 4 were Jews. And the leader of arguably the largest army in the world was Leon Trotsky, a Jew. It was absolutely incredible what happened, and that's why the people that have an interest in you never even thinking about this have worked overtime to convince you that communism is a horrible, brutal system. You couldn't be any wronger. They couldn't be any wronger about that. And they use their media, and they use their politicians, and they use their corporate interests to tell you that you don't want a system where you run the economy, and you do it for the benefit of human society, not to make somebody a profit. Rosa Luxemburg was a German, Jewish, Polish, communist, brilliant woman. And her point was that it's not a choice between capitalism and socialism. It's a choice between barbarism and socialism. And when we look at the world today, the murder, the mayhem, the death, the destruction, we should absolutely be able to make a better world. This city here, Los Angeles, Southern California, it's the largest industrial center in the largest industrial nation in the world. It's the largest, got the biggest port, right? 40% of all the imported goods. California's agriculture is the envy. We got Disneyland. I mean, this is the center of the world right here. And workers run it every day. They just don't know that. They're told that they're nothing and they're meaningless. But if we could get organized, we could shut this city down and freeze the world economy and then present a list of demands.
As a Jew, as I look back on the history of my people, when I think of the people I am most proud of, I think of Einstein, I think of Brandeis, I think of Goldwater. I certainly do not think of Leon Trotsky, who condemned so many people to suffering. And if you really would like to know what it is like to live under communist Russia, then read Be the Living, which was Ayn Rand's close to first-hand account of what it was like. And so, yeah, if it was so great, why did she leave? Why did she never get to see her family again?
She was a very wealthy family. It is very true that people with a lot of money hate communism. You're absolutely right about that.
I'm sorry, you know nothing about Ayn Rand.
Yeah, she was from a wealthy merchant family from
Yes,
St. Petersburg.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And they practically were starving for many years after when she was 12.
It's called Civil War.
And her litter, Civil War. Well, that's really a wonderful way to solve problems. She and her two younger sisters
communists did not start the Civil War.
From the apartment window of their building as blood was being spilled in the street, and soldiers came into her father's pharmacy and said, we are liberating this in the name of your neighbors, and you are now going to share your apartment, forget Airbnb.
God
This was the
forbid,
original
God
apartment.
forbid.
Okay.
Yeah, no thanks to God, or no thanks to the communists. And she left and never saw her family again. And her father ended up dying in the gulags. Into your wonderful system.
You want to talk
Shame
history?
on
You want to talk
Shame
history?
on you for,
You really
for
want to do
elevating
it?
your communism.
It's
I'm glad to do it because she's wrong.
let's jump over to the questions.
Yes.
Yes.
I do. Sir,
Save your questions till the end, guys. Save your questions till the end.
Save your questions to the end. We're gonna jump to the debate portion of the event. Okay. So we'll start with you, Dr. Mike. Like I asked before this.
Mike is okay.
Mike, Dr. Mike. So let's go on to taxes. Okay. Now that we're just talking about that, you have a room full of millennials. Okay. So I want to know from your perspective, what kind of tax plan would create the most successful future for us?
Well, I mean, if you're talking within the context of capitalism.